This cut today is going to focus heavily on the razor. It's going to be completed with the razor all the way throughout, and I'm just going to show then a few different texturizing techniques with the shears afterwards. As we go through it, again, if you've got questions, please feel free to stop, but I want to show you something that I did just to help prepare Miss Viola here. Working through her, you'll see that she has a pretty traditional bob type shape in here, a little graduation in the back, and her top, this interior, is also all solid length. A pretty common haircut that we see a lot of ladies also getting with just bringing that bob or those graduations in form. So this technique, which is our Stacy from our Arctic Lake collection, is going to show something just a little bit different, creating more of an asymmetry to her style, while also keeping a heavy amount of texture and a longer side off to her right. Again, it's all going to be completed with the razor. Just for prep with her, I've pre-parted her into I kind of call it a kite section here, as it's just a little bit longer on these two edges to her right and in the fringe. And you'll notice that the parting right at the fringe here is also on a slight diagonal, leaving a little bit of a heavier fringe to her left and slightly less to the right. So I prepped this just because we're going to be working through our interior just a little bit differently than how we're working through our exterior of our haircut. Starting this out, I'm going to actually separate out her fringe and just kind of push that off to one side for the time being, as I'll be working through that separately, kind of re-prepping and redefining her fringe as well from just that traditional kind of more smooth front into something that might have a little bit of that sweep to one side. Working through this sculpture, just to give you an idea, is I'm going to start out on her left side, and this is going to influence every decision that I make as I continue to travel around her head off to her right side, using a change in pattern of partings from a diagonal back that will work on her left, but as I move around her head, I'm then going to continue with those partings that will turn into a diagonal forward part, and that's what's going to allow me to increase some length. So with this, once I have that fringe separated out, I'm going to start out with just a slight diagonal back line as mentioned, taking this pretty steep, and as I work through here, I'm going to keep everything just projected straight onto that parting, just perpendicular and low to the head. So I'm not going to lift this up too high, and I don't want to take this and shift it around too much. I want to just have this distributed straight out of that part. And I'm actually going to sculpt this here pretty close to her hairline, right in between the corner of her brow and that hairline. Following just parallel to that part, I'm going to take my razor just right behind and just start to etch my way right through there. Etching behind my fingers, down into that hairline. And this portion right here is going to start out as a design line until I reach the back of the ear. So as I part through here, I'm just going to continue with parts that go parallel to that. Just going to separate that out. Bring this forward right to a stationary design line. What this is going to do is just start to increase that length as I go back away from the face. So I'm just going to let that design line slide out from my fingers behind and just etch my way right through. Again, just following parallel right through there.
Using the first section as a guideline.
Using that first as a design line, absolutely. Because it's just going to help kind of give a little bit of additional length as I work back towards the head. So once I take a parting that starts to reach into that back portion, reaches kind of right into my hairline here. This is going to be my last parting that gets brought all the way to the front.
So you start at the front of the ear and then you end up back of the ear.
And once I end up right to the back where that parting would kind of travel into that hairline, I'm going to pause and stop right there. So I'm going to bring myself forward. I'm letting my design line slide right through. Just etching right along there. Letting that etch right through there. So it starts to get just a little bit longer, and you can see that in length here, how it starts to actually drop towards the back following that line. Once I reach that point, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to continue taking these diagonal back parts all the way around, but now I'm going to actually just travel along with each and every parting. So as I work through here, I'm still going to use that diagonal back all the way around and into the nape. And I'm going to use just a little bit of that previous cut section to influence this. But what I'm going to start doing is actually giving myself a little bit of projection or elevation or lift from these partings. Is I'm going to take them up and off the head to about a medium projection, find my design line, let that travel back, and then just etch right through there. And I'm still following parallel to my part. So as that parting travels around the head, I would have to kind of move with it. But I'm working with the swivel tripod here, so it allows me to just stay in my spot and work around. Find my design line out here and etch, staying parallel to that part.
When you elevate, are you at 45-degree angle about?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't have to be an exact elevation. I just kind of consider it medium, which would be right around that 45.
Okay.
But that can lift a little higher, can stay a little bit lower, depending on how soft or heavy you want that to be.
Okay.
And that goes with any section of hair that you work with. The higher that you lift it, the softer that it gets. The lower that you hold it, the heavier that it'll be. So they work here. Just connecting this down into that nape, etching my way through. And now that portion that I just created with that razor etching is now going to influence the length of the neck. So it always travels on. That's what that mobile design line is going to do for me. So as I work my way through, I'm just going to continue with those diagonal back parts. Again, they are going to wrap around the head, so I just have to keep that in mind that as I continue to work around the head, that I would have to either, position my guest differently, or I myself might have to travel with it. So my previous parting now influences this. I'm taking that medium projection right off of there, finding my design line, letting it pass through. I'm staying parallel to that part, and then I'm etching. If you're coming in, feel free to join us. We've got plenty of chairs up front here. If you're joining us now, you'll also find that there is a designer note and a pen on your chair for you to help you out with note-taking. So again, just following that parting, staying parallel with my finger position, and just etching all the way through. Down in that nape, I'm just going to tilt her forward a slight bit and continue to etch. My next parting, again, is just going to follow parallel to the partings I've been taking, so they're going to continue to be diagonal back, but as I start to work my way around the head, they will start shifting to the diagonal forward. So again, here's my next parting. It's parallel to the previous parting. Again, I'm going to reposition my head to myself, so that way I'm traveling with each part. I'm not staying in one spot, allowing me to just create a little bit more softness from it. Each parting is going to use a medium elevation or projection, letting that guide slip right past my finger, and I'm just razor etching, staying parallel to that. As I work around the head, I've just got to reposition her so I can stay parallel to the part. Maintain that projection and etch right through. Follow this around the head, connecting down into this nape. And once I start to reach, especially the center of her head, there's not a lot that connects into that, just from previous graduation that she's had. So again, previous parting here, I'm now going to come through and create another diagonal back. So everything around this exterior portion that I have pre-sectioned out follows this diagonal parting from one side all the way around to the other. If you're joining us late, I'm going to do a little recap for you, just for a quick moment, that I started out separating Viola into a kite section here on the top. I've also separated out the fringe, and I started my sculpture here on her left side with a pretty short length in between the brow and the hairline. With that length, I've been working through a stationary guide all the way to the back tip of the ear. Once I reach that back tip of the ear, I then continue to follow diagonal parts all the way around until I reach the point right here. So I've been following the same technique starting on her left side all the way throughout. In my next parting, again, I'm going to continue this pattern. A medium projection, using my previous section as a design line, coming in and etching right behind there. Length is starting to get longer just because I'm always using the previous section. That's what's going to create this asymmetry throughout this design, leaving her actually a good portion of her length on this opposite side, but shorter to the left. And the reason why I've done that is just a new design, something different from our Arctic Light collection, to help change up that individual who might, already be working with that bob length, but want something different versus just a bunch of layering throughout it. Layering is always fun just to help mix things up, but let's come back to some asymmetry, have a little bit of fun with that. Yeah. Why not? Because he says so. Why not? But you'll also notice that as I work through this kite is actually going to have a heavy area of disconnection. We've seen a lot of disconnections in men's cut. Using also a lady over here as an example, that disconnection was short underneath, long on the top.
It's still a men's cut.
Well, I'm not saying it's a men's cut, but we see it more commonly in men, having these fades and these low cuts underneath with a very long disconnected top. That we can use that same principle of disconnection with shorter styles with women as well, without necessarily always the extreme, but your cut's beautiful and I love the color too. So I'll finish with a compliment.
Hold my undoing.
There we go. So just continuing around with this medium projection, I'm just distributing this perpendicular straight out from that parting, and my fingers are parallel, so I'm etching right through there. Again, as that parting travels around the head, I would have to move around the head, but again, thanks to my swivel tripod, I can stay put, and I can keep etching. Again, as I work through here, I've got already a little bit of connection into that graduated technique that's pre-existing, so I'm just going to touch that up to just connect it there. My next parting, yet again, is going to be a diagonal back. But on this side, now that I've started to cross over to her right side, it actually would really be more considered a diagonal forward because now it starts to drop low to the front. My parting's still the same, but it's just the position on the head that has changed how I'm looking at that, or that perception of it. Nothing changes as far as my sculpting procedure goes, that I'm still working. Bringing this straight out from that parting or perpendicular from it, my fingers are still parallel, and I am still etching, having a little bit of that projection, or otherwise known as elevation, to that hair. So I'm just lifting it out a wee bit from the head, etching through, and following through until I connect into any previous graduation that might be there. And less coming off there as I start to work into that length that's pre-existing. So, now that I've really started to make that change into a diagonal forward, I'm going to continue with it. Now when it comes to these sections and working with a razor, I am using a feather razor for it, and my sections are just based off of my own control with it. Whatever allows you to see your design line or your guide underneath there and what you're comfortable controlling and cutting through, of course you can take. So you've got to take that into mind. I traditionally work with about the width of a comb for any sections that I go through. It helps keep things pretty neat and easy for me in control and the ability to see my design line right through that. So working through here, finding my design line, I can see it as well, letting my fingers pass beyond it so I can etch and remove my length. Continuing, following that parting, following my procedures all the way through that I've been stating with bringing it straight out from the parting, keeping my fingers parallel to it and etching right through there. And now we can start to see here, I'm really maintaining more length because of where that line has gone to versus the opposite side that actually has come in quite a bit shorter. So we already have that evidence of a asymmetrical style. I'm going to continue to follow this around to my last parting here. And I want you to just notice that I'm at the corner of where my kite is from the top, and I've connected to where that back tip of the ear would be. A pretty common parting place when we're using separation. That is going to be my last parting that follows this true diagonal forward all the way around. So I'm going to finish up with this section, finding my excess length, moving beyond it, etching through there, moving around the head if necessary, getting my distribution, my elevation just right, etching through, and connecting into any length that I may need to. Now what's going to happen through this front is I'm actually going to use a little bit of a pivotal part throughout this. Is I'm going to maintain my position here. So pivotal parts, think of like slices of a pie, a beach ball. I like pie because I'm a sweet tooth. So when I look at this, I think about that. I've got to have a focal point here, and then every parting is going to pivot a bit differently off of that, working my way throughout. So as I start my first one, it's going to just flare out a little bit differently than that traditional diagonal forward I've been using. It starts to extend towards that front hairline. And because of that ability for that to drop, I'm going to go ahead and just secure that for a moment. Everything else is still the same. Medium projection, which means I'm going to hold it roughly around a 45-degree angle. That can change. Medium is anywhere between about 30 and 60, but I'm not having a projector out to measure this, so it's all about just don't have it low, don't have it straight up off the head, have it somewhere right in between. I'm still going to use some of that previous length as a design line, but now I'm going to position my fingers to follow that parting. All right, so I've got a slight change here where before I was a little bit steeper, so it's a subtle change, but as I work through, I'm going to be working almost to a horizontal as I go through that side, just so you have a little expectation of what's to come. Out to that, find it, let the fingers slide past, etch through, continue down to the rest of my parting, etch through. Got a little strand that wants to stick to her ear, so there we go. And etch down into my length. So once I complete that parting, as I mentioned, I've got to pivot with my part. So this one's going to stay at that corner of the kite, and it's now going to pivot to come into the temple. Once I have that, again, everything else stays the same. Medium projection, bringing it straight out from the parting, and my fingers are going to stay parallel to that. I'm going to find my length as just a guideline, and I'm going to etch along there. And what this is going to help me do is I'm going to maintain length by working down on that diagonal, but as I work up, I'm going to add more activation to it. She's going to have more movement to this side, so it's not just so heavy and has that, called the dog ear syndrome, right? Where it just hangs and flops there. And maybe someone finds that funny. Yeah, works for me. So bringing it out, finding my design line, and again, etching right along there, connecting it to the length that's already pre-existing. Again, she started at that bob or traditional graduated shape, so I'm helping to build off of that. Coming back here, my next parting, as I mentioned, they have to continue to pivot. Very good. And I'm going to turn that one open. Release. Again, I will secure this here. I'm just going to get myself in a position so that way I can bring it straight out from that parting. A medium projection, finding that design line underneath and continuing to etch through there. Bring it all the way to that front hairline. And etch through, again at that diagonal, I'm connecting to that front length. My very last parting here, the top of it is more horizontal. I'm going to work her down just a little bit as it gets a little high. So again, my fingers are going to follow that parting. That as I'm working off of that, my fingers are going to stay parallel to that top parting. Finding a design line from underneath. I've got a length reference from that back pivotal corner, and again, I am etching right through there. So find my design line, pass through it, and etch to that front hairline. So again, she maintains a lot more length off to this side here, but there's going to be great activation all throughout, including the texturizing that we'll do afterwards. This fringe, I'm going to dampen her down a wee bit. So working with this fringe, I'm going to use my parting that already exists from that kite portion there. I'm going to use a length reference off of that left side And with this fringe, I'm just going to hold it on a lower projection, maintain a little bit more weight, find that length inside, and now I'm just going to lightly etch with a goal of connecting it to the length that's already pre-existing in that fringe. So as I work my way across, just going to parallel right to my part, etch through there, taking off less and less as I go. And once I reach the opposite side, I should be removing just very minimal length over here as I just connect it, help to open up those facial features a bit more. Once I have that fringe outlined, what I want to do now is just take that side panel near her ear, and I'm just going to bring this forward off of a diagonal part. And I'm just going to help it connect, removing this corner that exists on that side with a very light etching from the edge of that fringe down to the length. I don't want to take a lot of that off. It's just enough to help soften up around those facial features. Once I have that completed, I'm now going to be moving into this interior portion. Before I go there, I'm going to separate out a small horseshoe section off of that exterior in that crown. This length right here is going to help be a length guide for the rest of my interior. So I'm just going to drop my interior loose. If you'd like to, you certainly could clip this off just for that hair control if you don't want to work with managing that whatsoever. And I'm now going to just include that horseshoe into that interior. Just her head position, just tilting her forward. And I'm going to work through this interior in vertical parts. So everything's going to come from the back of her head in individual vertical sections. Each one of these parts lives individually of itself because my design line came from the horseshoe. And it will progressively get longer to one side because my horseshoe would progressively get longer because that's how the exterior works. So as I go through here, just going off to her left side, I'm going to start with my shorter side first. Take that vertical part all the way to the fringe. And I'm going to project this straight up, very high off the top of the head. So we've got to keep in mind, if her head is tilted forward, I don't want to bring it too far to me as I actually would change where this hair is lifted and I could cut through my length. So keep in mind that head position in your own position as we actually are going to cut and sculpt this from short in the back, longer towards the fringe. So as I bring this up, I myself am even just going to do a little bit of tippy toe. Going to come out at a slight diagonal, working off that back length. I'm just going to etch and work my way out to those ends. I'm going to lose my fringe, and that's good. So I'm just going to etch through this, following that diagonal line, leaving a bit more length to the front. That is going to be disconnected from your fringe. They are not going to blend. If we did that, we'd end up with a very round top anyways. So we want to leave that disconnected. I don't really need that parting anymore because my design line comes from the back of each. So you don't have to take anything with you.
To go to the front, don't you have to set kind of a special lens?
Where I want this length to be?
Yeah.
It's all based off of that angle of where I want it to go. If I wanted to maintain more length, I would increase that angle.
So it's up to you.
So it's up to you on how much of that you want, which I'm just using a pretty kind of a medium standard angle there working through it. Yes?
So are you staying pretty parallel or are you bringing it forward more?
I'm staying parallel to that section, but as I etch, I'm just sliding through my section, and if I need to, then I'll reposition myself to go through. If I slide with it, I have the ability to sometimes slide through it, and you got to be careful with that. So, and you'd end up with just a long, painstaking way to create a 90 or uniformly layered sculpture. So I'm going to continue with these vertical parts. Again, the width of these are all up to you, so it's not a matter of you've got to have 5 to 7 to 9 partings throughout here. As I mentioned earlier, I like to use the width of my comb as a pretty standard working width, especially with my Viola. She's got a beautiful density here to be pretty close to a human. If you've got a little bit of a harder time managing hair, you can go thinner. If you've got great control, then you could go a little bit thicker. So it's all about just what you feel comfortable with and what your tool can work through as well. So with this, again, just projecting that high, I'm keeping my fingers just right along with where my parting is, but I'm turning them out at that angle. I'm going from where that design length is, letting it loosen up, and now I'm etching through there, working forward. I will reposition myself to gain control of what's over the front of her facial features here and etch out, just working my way through. Just to check to make sure that didn't drop loose. There's just a little hair that I'd like to get off of there. There we go. I don't need that anymore. I can let that drop. And you can already see here where some of that disconnection is going to take place. It's going to hang over. That's what we want. We're going for disconnection here. So as I work to the side, again, I'm going from her left to her right. Taking that parting, I'm going to etch her this way. Taking this and, again, coming right up off the top of the head, very high projection or elevation as you may know it. Finding my length in the back of my fingertips, and I'm etching through there. Once I've started to slide, I'm just going to reposition myself. Again, I've lost my fringe, that's a good thing, and I'm going to etch up and away. And what I should find is that also to this length is that it will progressively get longer from right to left, because my design line in the back was getting longer as it wrapped around the head as well. Again, I don't need to keep that. I can drop that loose. Take my next parting. Separate into what I can control. Up, out, and etch. And definitely getting quite a bit longer out here as I'm removing less and less off of that length. Once I finish, off to the side. And I've got about 2 last partings here. Again, starting in the back, using that design line. Quite a bit longer here. High projection, and etching that out. As I travel forward, reposition myself to maintain that same cutting angle. Again, I don't need any of those previous partings because, again, my design line comes from the back. This is my very last parting here through that interior. Take what I can control, bring that up, out at that angle, etch through, gesundheit, and etch all the way out. So that way, once I have that completed, I would then be able to take a look and see that I should have a much longer side to her right. That will definitely bring in some activation. But what I want to continue to do is go through and just texturize her a bit. So I'm going to use a point cutting technique to remove a little bit more texture while she's damp as well. So what I want to do is I'm going to go through this side here where I'm going to start out on my heavy side and working with diagonal forward parts. I'm going to tilt her head forward. I'm going to work with my shears through this, and I'm not going to go with my shorties, I'm going to go with some long ones. Taking a slightly thicker parting, I don't want to go too thin on this since I'm texturizing. I am going to hold this parting right out from that parting that I've placed, and using my shears I'm going to point cut. So I'm going to just texturize out those ends just to help soften them up. So that motion is just all about using my shears, and they're just slightly open. They're not all the way as I'm prepared to cut, but I'm going in and just as I work my way out, I'm closing them to just slide cut and texturize through that, or what we call point cutting. So taking that diagonal forward part.
What tips do you have to make sure you don't get a hole right there? You have
Be easy with it. Since you're working on damp hair, you've got to keep in mind that when you texturize damp hair, it's easy to remove more than what you're anticipating. You know, a lot of people prefer to texturize on dry hair just because you can see it come to life a bit more. But I know just from the feel of her that she's already a bit heavy, and I know that I want texture in it as well.
Okay.
So as I work through that, I'm not texturizing it as my end-all, finish-all technique. I will dry her, and I would texturize her some more just to finish that up. But I know that I want to remove some of that bulk, so I'm not afraid to do it while she's damp, to get in there and just ever so lightly just go through there. And you can see where it's starting to separate out and where you're texturizing, so you don't have to go nuts on it, because you will remove a lot more than you think when you're texturizing wet or damp hair. But you don't have to be afraid of it either. It's all about a little bit of self-control. And if you can find that, then you might be okay. So just going to texturize that lightly, let that back. Again, as I go through, just going to take a diagonal forward parting. You can see they're quite a bit thicker here. They're not as thin as my traditional cutting sections have been. So I'm just going to take this out and a nice high projection from those parts. Getting out to about those last few inches of the ends. And again, just performing my point cutting technique. And a big thing I would say also when you're using this technique is do make sure that your shears are sharp as well. Because if they're not, you will not pass very cleanly through that hair. So once I've texturized, I'm just going to continue through that interior and through that side. Again, coming out to about those last few inches of the ends and point cutting right through there. Don't want to double texturize, so if I've got to reposition, get rid of what I've already texturized, come right in, and again, it's using those very tips of the shears for that point cutting coming in. It's really in the wrist quite a bit. It's a lot here. I'm not coming into it. I don't need to attack it. So just going to work through just to lighten up some of this heavy side. And then after this parting here, then I'll work into drying her and texturizing that finished design. Out to those ends, again, coming in and using just the very tips, and as I slide through, those shears are just slightly closing. So I'm not opening and coming at it because you'd be cutting large panels out of it. So you've got to watch the technique that your shears are already about halfway closed, and you're going through there and just working them out on that C shape. So it's in and out. So that's just going to help create a little bit more activation to that side. Again, it's not the only texturizing that I'm going to do to her hair. She will get dried, finished, and retexturized. And I'm going to start working into doing a little bit of flat wrapping on her hair just to finish her out. I'll come back through and I'll be retexturizing some of the additional side too when it's dry, but because it's shorter, I want to be a little bit more delicate with it. I don't want to overdo it because then I can end up exposing skin throughout that. So a lot of my flat wrapping technique is going to take place just with the paddle brush and just working her into that pattern. And I do want to let you know that as I'm going through and finishing her, that this look here did come from our Arctic Light collection. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, you can take a look at it too. I've got a book out here in the open. You can come and look at it. It includes all of the technical procedures for the haircut that I've done here. And if you were in yesterday's class, the haircut for that one as well. The technical book and the DVD that walks you through each one of the 4 collections that comes in this Arctic Light collection, as well as also the color palette that we use to create the looks. So if you're interested, by all means, you can come up and you can take a look at them. I'm going to have them on sale at the end of the show or at the end of the class here as well. But I'm going to take you through just some of that flat wrapping procedure that I'm going to use. when I go through flat wrapping with the shorter hair design here, I'm going to start out with my shortest section, which is going to be right on that fringe. And I'm just going to wrap this one section into another using my paddle brush. Big key for this one here to help keep that hair under control. So as I work through here before I go high speed, I'm using the entire length of my brush and working that down against the skin as I blow dry right over that. A few things to keep in mind as you're using a paddle brush is depending on the way that you use the teeth as well. If you're working even with longer hair, when you go to separate out, use that brush vertically through the hair. The teeth on the brush will actually align this way here, so it allows you to part through there quite easily. When you want maximum tension to help get that hair straight and smooth, go horizontally with the brush or across the short end of it, because then the teeth don't align and they'll give you more tension on the hair, giving a little bit more pull and getting her a little bit smoother. So again, I'm just going to use that entire brush length horizontally here to just work one section into another. From that root area or the base, all the way through those ends, just combining them and bringing them one into the other to help dry that up. And as I work through, I'll continue to add another thin parting from one end to the other as I go through that. Now I'm going to take a moment to pause here just as I dry up this short side. I want to show you a few texturizing techniques here before our day's at a close, because 1 hour can go by pretty quick. Don't be afraid, even on women in shorter styles, to use texturizing shears for it as well. I find a lot of people that can sometimes want to steer away from it just because it's something we traditionally do a lot with men. If you're using them, then great. I'm going to give you a few tips and techniques to just help you work through that. So with my texturizing shears, to help soften up some of that weight, some of that bulk that can be in there, I'm going to come back in on an opposite diagonal line to than what we started with. We came in and we sculpted this hair design on diagonal back on this side. So I'm going to take this and now take diagonal forward and take this parting out, and then I can texturize as close to the base as that density will allow me to. We know that finer hair I can texturize a little bit closer. On coarser hair I stay back a little bit further. So I can just come right in, I can texturize right through that. But as I do it, I'm going to also just continue to work my way up into those ends just to help soften them up as much as I would like to and need to see for my finished design. So diagonal forward, taking up that parting separately. I'm staying parallel to how those lines are. I can texturize in pretty close. The texturizing shear that I'm using is a little bit of a wider spacing between the teeth. I don't want to necessarily go super fine. A chunking or a channeling shear would also work really great here to help create additional separation. As I work my way right into that, again, I can texturize close and just continue to soften up out into those ends to texturize. Additional techniques I can continue to use just to give you some more insight and some ideas is I can, even on the dry texture, I can come in and I can use that point cutting technique and work my way through here. You're going to find that if you need to take out a lot of texture, that's a little bit more detail work, that I wouldn't do a lot of your heavy work through that. But you can also use a notching technique into this if you want to soften up those ends, where you can come in just parallel to those strands of the hair and just texturize deeply into those partings that way as well. So you've got a few different variations that you can work this through depending on what your own preference is and your comfort zone. For her hair and the density, I'll tell you after I just finished demonstrating this one here, I myself would prefer to use the texturizing shears to actually help soften her because she is pretty dense. Our Viola mannequin has just as much hair as an average human being does, and she's 100% human hair too. So it really is going to help give me a little bit more of that realistic finish to it. So I'm going to go back to my texturizing shears. Again, taking these diagonal forward parts on the short side, which is opposite than where we started. I'm just going to texturize from that middle of the strand out into those ends. Just to help soften that up. And that's just going to help take out some of that bulk and allow that to start collapsing in on itself quite a bit more. So with that, I'm going to go through and finish styling her. I don't know if anyone has any questions on some of the techniques that were used throughout today. Could I answer any for you? Some tips that you think you'd be able to walk over? Pretty informative? That's good to know. Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there anything that you know that you'll definitely probably take away with you, be able to use in the salon, or